That's her Lexus. The one now completely entombed in my brand new, fully legal garage. HOA Karen screaming from the sidewalk like I committed a crime. But here's the kicker. I invited the city inspector to cut the ribbon. Yeah, how did we get here? Let's rewind. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. You might be wondering, how do you even legally pull that off? And how does she not notice? Trust me, we'll get to the sewage soon enough. But first, you need to understand what kind of war this was. It didn't start with the well. It didn't even start with her Lexus constantly squatting on my driveway like a pampered housecat. No, this saga began with a smile. The kind of smile that hides contracts and threats behind HOA letterhead. When I bought the house, I specifically looked for one outside of any HOA zone. I'm not anti-community or anything. I just like my freedom, my garage time, and not being fined for having my garbage cans visible for exactly 7 minutes after pickup. My little plot of heaven was legally outside the HOA's reach, confirmed by zoning maps and property record. But apparently, that didn't sit well with Karen. Karen, or as she introduced herself the day I moved in, Karen Winslow, president of the Oak Ridge Community Standards Council, walked right into my driveway like she owned it. No welcome to the neighborhood, no cookies, not even a fake smile. Just a manila folder of what she called guidelines to maintain community integrity. I was halfway through unloading my vintage Mustang parts when she started her speech about mailbox height, lawn length, and the dangers of unsanctioned vehicle restoration. I told her politely that I was not under HOA jurisdiction. She told me, and I quote, "The spirit of the HOA extends past technical borders." That was my first red flag. My second was when she started taking photos of my tires. A week later, I found a notice taped to my door. Not mailed. Taped. It looked official until you actually read it. A so-called pre-violation warning for having an unregistered vehicle in plain view. That vehicle? My covered, insured, and fully registered Mustang, parked in my own driveway. I laughed and tossed the paper. The next day, Karen parked her Lexus so far onto my driveway that I had to walk across my lawn to get to my garage. I caught her as she was getting out. I said, "You do realize that's not a public parking spot, right?" She looked over her sunglasses like I was some kind of rude interruption to her day. "There's no curb, so it's not technically blocking anything. And besides, I'm hosting a garden club. Just for an hour." The garden club lasted 4 hours. And she did it again. And again. Every Sunday. Same spot. Same smug Lexus. I even tried putting cones out. She moved them. I left polite notes. She returned them with grammar corrections. Once, she even scribbled, "Maybe take a walk, it's healthier," under my message about driveway access. Now I'm not a confrontational guy. But I do own a drone, a thermal camera, and a binder full of property law. So instead of yelling, I started documenting. Every time her car touched my concrete, I filmed it. I sent one video to a subreddit. The comments? Glorious. One said, "Bro, just build a garage over it next time." That was meant as a joke. But see, jokes give you ideas. The tipping point came with the well. I installed a private well system shortly after moving in, mostly for car washing and watering the tomatoes. One day, I noticed the water pressure dipping whenever Karen's sprinklers were on. Coincidence? Maybe. Until I followed the line. She had connected an auxiliary hose into my rear spigot using a Y-splitter, buried under a fake rock. I traced the tubing and yep, it went right under the fence into her hydrangea patch. She was literally stealing my water. I didn't call the cops. I called a plumber. Had the system rerouted and connected to a test pipe filled with, let's just say, not so fresh reclaimed sewage water. The next morning, Karen's garden had a distinct funk. That evening, she posted on the HOA Facebook group about a sabotage incident by a disgruntled neighbor. No one commented. I suspect they knew better. You'd think that'd be the end of it. But Karen? She doubled down. She started parking her car even deeper into my driveway, then claimed it was community shared space. When I pointed out the property lines, she said I was interpreting them aggressively. The city was called, by her. An inspector showed up, took one look at the boundary map and said, "Yeah, she's way over." I smiled. Because that's when I found something beautiful, an old permit buried in the house paperwork. A detached garage permit, still valid, never used. Zoned for exactly where she kept parking. I spent the next few nights reading municipal code like it was a revenge novel. Turns out, not only could I build a detached garage there, I could legally do it with zero input from the HOA. Because, again, I wasn't in it. That was the moment the idea became a plan. I didn't have to tow her Lexus. I could just build around it. I started calling contractors. I told them exactly what I wanted. A quick, prefab single-car garage, nothing fancy. Just enough to house a vehicle. One contractor laughed and said, "You want us to box someone in?" I replied, No. I want you to build a garage on my land. Whatever happens to be inside it, that's just timing." They were in. I picked the start date for a Monday. Karen's Lexus had been parked on my driveway every Sunday night without fail. If she didn't move it this time, well, the foundation would just have to be poured with it inside. But the real cherry on top? That Friday, she slid another fake violation under my door. This one claimed that my trash bins were excessively scuffed and lowering property values. She finished it with, "You should consider more community-friendly habits." So I did. That Sunday night, I went to sleep early. And in the morning, when the contractors pulled up with concrete mixers and tool belts, Karen's Lexus was right there. Shiny. Smug. Centered. By noon, the foundation was done. By evening, the frame was up. And by the next morning, Karen still hadn't noticed her Lexus was now technically indoors. She noticed at 7:42 a.m. when she tried to walk out and found a wall of plywood and insulation blocking her view. And if you think that was the peak of chaos, just wait until you hear what she tried to do next. Let's just say the fire department got involved, but not for the reason you think. Karen's screams echoed through the street like a car alarm with a superiority complex. She stood on the curb in her robe, hair wild, demanding to know who had illegally imprisoned her vehicle. I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching the sunrise with a smile that said, "Good morning to everyone except you." She stormed over, flailing her arms, and yelled, "You can't do this. You'll be arrested. This is kidnapping." I responded, "I'm pretty sure that only applies to people. Also, this is private property." "My property? And your car?" "It's parked right in the middle of a now fully enclosed structure." I pointed to the city-issued permit taped proudly to the side of the garage. Which, by the way, is entirely legal and signed off by the city inspector. She gawked like I had just explained the plot of Inception to a squirrel. Then she tried her usual move, the HOA threat. "I'm reporting this. You'll be fined. You're in violation of at least 5 community standards." I just blinked at her. "Karen, once again, for the record, I am not in the HOA. Your rules are as enforceable on me as unicorn bylaws. Go ahead. File a complaint with the Tooth Fairy." But Karen never gave up easy. That morning, she called the police. I watched the squad car pull up, and 2 officers stepped out, clearly bracing themselves. Karen launched into her story with the enthusiasm of a theater major. Words like illegal detainment, sabotage, and malicious construction were tossed around. She was halfway through her Oscar campaign when one of the officers asked for my side. I handed them the permit, the surveyor's map, the footage of her car parked on my property line for 3 months straight, and a signed statement from my contractor. The second officer cracked a smile. So let me get this straight. She parked on your land, and you built a structure around it, completely within your rights. I nodded. Exactly. He turned to his partner. Well, I'll be. That's a new one. Karen sputtered something about property rights and emotional distress, but the officers politely told her this was a civil matter. One of them added, "Might want to move your car next time." That day, something shifted. Karen wasn't just annoyed. She was furious. She didn't just want to win anymore, she wanted revenge. But the thing about people like her is that they don't know how to fight without a rulebook. And unfortunately for her, I had already burned every copy of it. She returned the next day with a clipboard, flanked by 2 HOA board members. They were clearly uncomfortable, whispering and glancing between her and my garage like they'd just walked into a trap. Karen pointed at my garage like it was a war crime. This is not in the aesthetic character of Oak Ridge. It lowers property values. One of the board members, a middle-aged man with a sun visor and weak chin, muttered, "Technically he's outside HOA boundaries." Karen spun on him with the fury of a dethroned queen. "You're seriously going to let this stand?" I leaned over my porch railing. "You're welcome to make me an offer for the car inside. I charge a very reasonable storage fee." She turned back to me and hissed, "You won't get away with this." I said, "Karen, I already did. The paint's dry." The next week was quiet. Too quiet. Karen didn't park near my property. She didn't knock on my door or leave passive-aggressive note. I should have known that meant she was plotting something. And sure enough, something arrived in my mailbox. Not a letter this time, but a notice from the City Code Enforcement Office. It claimed that my garage was a zoning violation due to insufficient side yard clearance. Nice try, Karen. I called the inspector listed on the notice. Turns out, Karen had filed a complaint under her maiden name, claiming to be a concerned neighbor. But the inspector remembered the original permit. When he came out for a follow-up inspection, he actually laughed. "This again? Everything's by the book." Honestly, if this had been me, I'd have installed a turntable and made it a car museum. He wrote up a report confirming I was in full compliance and warned me Karen might keep trying. "Some people don't take losing well," he said. "You've got the patience of a saint or the pettiness of a god. Not sure which." I told him, "Bit of both, probably." The next time Karen made a move, it was theatrical even by her standards. She brought in a tow truck. At 7 in the morning, I heard beeping and walked out to find her gesturing wildly at a man with a flatbed, telling him to just yank the car out. Only one problem. There was no way to get the car out without tearing down a wall. The driver got out, took one look at the garage and said, "Ma'am, you understand I can't tow something that's inside a building, right? This isn't a parking garage. It's private property." Karen demanded he call his supervisor. He did. His supervisor laughed so hard I could hear it through the phone. Karen left fuming, and the tow truck rolled away empty. That's when I decided it was time to go from defense to offense. I called my lawyer, a friend from college who owed me a favor, and asked if we could send a cease and desist to the HOA. Not only were they harassing me, but Karen had attempted multiple false reports. We drafted a formal letter stating that any further attempts to interfere with my property would be considered targeted harassment. We attached the permit, inspector notes, and video evidence. Then, just to twist the knife, I included an invoice for the unauthorized use of my land over the past 3 months, totaling $3,800 in backdated parking fees. The letter was delivered to the HOA's attorney and the board members. I didn't expect them to pay, obviously. But that wasn't the point. The point was that they now knew. I was done playing nice. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, Karen showed up with a film crew. I swear to you, she hired some local YouTube channel to do a community expose about rogue neighbors destroying suburban peace. She tried to narrate her side of the story while standing in front of the garage. But the moment I came outside with the permit, her footage guy asked if I could explain on camera. I did. I explained everything with a smile on record. They posted the video a week later. The comments roasted her so hard, she disabled likes and blocked replies. My garage? It got nicknamed the Lexus Tomb and trended on a couple of HOA-themed subreddit. Someone even made a meme out of it, a skeleton behind garage bars with the caption, "Still waiting for Karen to apologize." That should have been enough. But Karen wasn't finished. One morning, I woke up to find that the lock on the garage door had been cut and replaced. Inside, the Lexus was gone. And that, my friend, was her final mistake. Because now it wasn't just property conflict. Now it was breaking and entering. I called the police. And this time, Karen wouldn't be walking away with just a warning. The cops arrived within 20 minutes, faster than I expected for a non-emergency call. I didn't even have to explain much. The garage door was clearly broken into, bolt cutters left in the driveway like a dropped murder weapon. The lock I installed was snapped, and the shiny empty space where Karen's Lexus used to be felt more incriminating than blood at a crime scene. I gave them the timeline, the photos, and security footage showing Karen sneaking in with a man, her brother, apparently, at 3 a.m, cutting the lock and driving the car out. They didn't even try to be subtle. Her brother waved at my camera on the way out like it was a reality show. I think he thought it was funny. And maybe it was, until the officers asked me one simple question. Do you want to press charges? Now, I didn't answer right away. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to savor the moment. I looked the officer dead in the eye and said, "Oh, absolutely. Let's do this by the book." That's when I handed over the copy of the invoice I'd previously sent to the HOA, noting the unpaid fees for unauthorized use of my land and garage. I told them the car was being held legally, on my property, with proper documentation, and that removing it without my consent constituted trespassing and theft. They took the report and said they'd be contacting Karen within the hour. And when they did, the fallout was nuclear. I wasn't there when they showed up at her door, but my neighbor across the street filmed it from behind her curtains. Karen came out in a floral bathrobe, half asleep and half furious. She was yelling before the officers even finished reading the warrant. She insisted it was her car and that I had trapped it unlawfully. The officers calmly explained that the garage was on my property, and removing her vehicle without resolving the dispute legally had crossed the line. The look on her face as they served her with paperwork was pure poetry. That afternoon, I got a call from her brother. He tried to play it cool at first, like this was all some misunderstanding between grown adults. I let him talk. He rambled about how he didn't mean any harm, how they thought I was bluffing, how Karen just wanted her car back, and how they didn't know I'd actually press charges. When he finally paused, I asked, "Do you break into every neighbor's garage when they don't open the door fast enough?" He went silent. Then he tried one more Hail Mary. "What if we just returned the car and called it even?" I told him that ship sailed the moment they used bolt cutters and committed actual theft. He hung up. I think that's when it really hit him. Within the week, Karen was formally charged with trespassing and destruction of property. Her brother got slapped with aiding and abetting. Nothing jail-worthy, but it was enough to give them a record and a serious legal headache. Karen tried to save face by filing a counterclaim for emotional distress and property seizure. Her lawyer probably thought they had something, but once the city inspector and police weighed in, the case fell apart like a wet napkin. Meanwhile, I decided to make the most of the now empty garage. I reinforced it with steel doors, added motion sensor lighting, and put up a camera warning sign, just in case Karen got any more ideas. I also installed a lift and moved my Mustang into the space. It felt right. The garage had been born out of her pettiness, and now it housed the one thing she hated most about me, my independence. I wasn't the only one getting fed up. The HOA board, already tired of Karen's crusades, began to turn on her. One member showed up at my door with coffee and a quiet apology. He admitted they'd let her overstep for too long, thinking she'd eventually burn out. Instead, she burned bridges. The water theft, the false citations, the public spectacle, it all made the neighborhood look unstable. Property values dipped because people were scared to move in. And once the garage incident made it onto local news, yes, it did, buyers started backing out of deals. The board held an emergency meeting, and while I wasn't invited, I got the summary the next day. Karen was voted out of her position as president. She screamed about legal action, but no one backed her. She tried to rally her Facebook group, but it had turned into a ghost town. The once dedicated group of HOA enforcers either resigned or ghosted her entirely. The post about my garage, which she once pinned to the top with angry emojis, had been quietly deleted. You'd think she'd lay low after that. You'd think she'd realize the war was over and she lost. But Karen had one more move. She tried to sue me privately, again, for emotional damages. Claimed she'd developed anxiety and paranoia, said I created a hostile living environment, and included dramatic claims about how being surrounded by surveillance and weaponized architecture made her feel unsafe. I showed up to court with a suit, a smile, and a USB stick full of security footage. I let her talk for 15 minutes. The judge's eyes glazed over about halfway through. When it was my turn, I calmly laid out the timeline. Every false HOA letter. Every time she parked illegally. The theft of my water. The sewage response. The video of the break-in. The city inspector's testimony. The police report. And finally, a series of screenshots from the Reddit thread where she had publicly commented under a fake username but used her same writing style and complained about a neighbor who thinks he's clever with his fancy Mustang and legal loopholes. The judge dismissed the case within 20 minutes. He even said, on record, that Karen was lucky I hadn't gone further with civil suits of my own. Outside the courtroom, she tried to give me one last glare, but it lacked bite. She looked exhausted. Smaller. Like all the drama had finally weighed her down. I didn't say anything. Just gave her a slight nod and walked away. Back home, things felt different. Calmer. The air wasn't buzzing with tension anymore. Neighbors started waving again. One even asked if I could help them file a property survey, just in case. The board sent me a formal apology and a certificate of appreciation for maintaining neighborhood integrity through lawful action. I framed it ironically and hung it next to a photo of the garage during construction, Karen's Lexus visible through the framing studs like a trophy in a hunter's cabin. Eventually, Karen put her house up for sale. The listing lasted 4 months. No offers. Word gets around fast, especially when your name is linked to viral garage drama. She ended up taking a loss, packed up, and left one weekend without telling anyone. The Lexus never came back. As for me, I turned the garage into something more than a monument. I converted the back half into a workshop, added insulation, ventilation, and even a tiny fridge. It became my sanctuary. A place built on spite but finished with satisfaction. Every time I turned a wrench, I remembered how it started, with a blocked driveway and a power-hungry neighbor who thought she could bend reality with paperwork and intimidation. But it turns out, the law is a beautiful thing when you know how to use it. And just when I thought everything was finally settled, I got a letter. Not from Karen, not from the HOA, but from the city. They wanted to talk about an anonymous complaint regarding excessive outbuilding use and suspicious activities after dark. It was unsigned, but I had a feeling I knew exactly who couldn't let things go. The letter was typed in that stiff, overly formal tone that screams anonymous complaint, as if removing a name made it more legitimate. Someone had submitted it to the city claiming my garage was being used for unregistered commercial activity, whatever that meant. They cited late-night noises, unusual traffic, and my personal favorite, possible illegal modifications involving toxic materials. I read it 3 times and couldn't stop laughing. The most toxic thing in that garage was my sarcasm. But I knew this wasn't just some bored neighbor. No, this had Karen's ghost all over it. She might have moved out, but she clearly wasn't done trying to cause problems from the shadows. I called the city department listed on the letter, spoke to a very tired-sounding clerk named Denise, and asked about the complaint. She paused for a long second and said, "Honestly? We get a lot of these from that neighborhood. You're not the first. Sounds like someone's got a grudge." I told her I was happy to let an inspector come by. I had nothing to hide. In fact, I'd give them the tour and a cold soda. Denise laughed and scheduled the visit for later that week. On inspection day, I swept the garage twice, even though it was already spotless. The inspector, a guy named Marvin, showed up looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He glanced around, checked off a few boxes on his clipboard, and asked me what I did out here. I showed him the lift, my Mustang, a couple of tool chests, and the mini fridge stocked with root beer. He asked if I ran a business out of it. I told him the only thing I sold was the illusion of peace and quiet. Marvin smirked, nodded, and said, "This is cleaner than my kitchen. You're good." Before he left, I asked if the complaint had come from anyone specific. He said he couldn't say, but off the record, the wording matches a few past ones. Same phrases. Same punctuation. Kind of obsessed with community safety. I thanked him and saw him out. As the inspection truck pulled away, I stood in the driveway and let the quiet sink in again. Karen might have been gone, but her pettiness still floated in the air like smoke after a trash fire. It was tempting to let it go, to just move on and enjoy my hard-earned peace. But there's a certain point where it stops being about revenge and starts being about precedent. If I let this slide, what next? Another fake complaint? Another anonymous letter? Some bogus environmental claim about my tomato plants leaking toxins into the soil? No, this had to end properly. So I got creative. I contacted a local neighborhood podcast that had recently done a segment on HOA horror stories. I sent them a summary of what happened, including clips, public records, and the infamous garage photo. They were instantly hooked. A week later, they ran an episode called Garage Justice, when the HOA queen loses her crown, complete with dramatic music and sarcastic narration that would have made me blush. The episode blew up. Apparently, people really love stories where the little guy buries Alexis in a legal structure. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a producer at a cable network that runs a show about absurd real estate dispute. They asked if I'd be open to a short interview. I agreed, mostly because the idea of my garage becoming a set piece on national TV was too ridiculous to pass up. They filmed for half a day, interviewed me, a few neighbors, even Marvin the inspector, and reenacted the Lexus incident using a cardboard cutout and dramatic lighting. It was as petty and perfect as I'd hoped. The HOA, or what was left of it, didn't know how to react. Most of the original board had resigned or distanced themselves after the Karen debacle, and the new members weren't interested in reigniting the war. They issued a formal statement disavowing Karen's actions and promising to focus on unity and transparency, which, in HOA terms, meant, please don't sue us or put us on TV. One day, I got an email from Karen. The subject line was blank. The message was 2 sentences. You think you won, but you just made a fool of yourself publicly. I hope it was worth it. I stared at it for a while before replying. Oh, it absolutely was. And by the way, the internet thinks you're the fool. But thanks for the inspiration. Best garage I've ever built. She didn't reply. Months passed. The air really did clear. No more citations, no more threats, no more letters or late-night retaliation attempts. The garage stood as both monument and warning. New neighbors moved in, a quiet family with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They waved the first day, brought brownies the second, and asked if I'd help them build a raised garden bed on the third. I did, and we got along great. I even let the kids take photos sitting in the Mustang. When the dad saw the garage setup, he said, "Man, this is legit. You do this yourself." I laughed. Not exactly. Let's just say it was built during a situation. He nodded like he understood more than I said. Maybe he did. Eventually, I found myself spending more time in that garage, not because I was avoiding conflict, but because I finally had a space built entirely on my own terms. No one told me what color to paint the door, or how loud to play music, or when to bring the trash cans in. It was mine. Every inch of it, from the poured concrete to the steel beams to the skylight I later added for better natural lighting. It wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a reminder that even when the system is stacked with pettiness and bureaucracy, you can still outmaneuver it, if you're smart, stubborn, and just petty enough to out-Karen a Karen. The Mustang purred like a dream. I'd finally finished the full restoration. Took it for a spin every weekend, sometimes just around the neighborhood, windows down, engine rumbling low and proud. And every time I passed Karen's old house, now repainted and quiet, I smiled. Not out of cruelty. Just satisfaction. One evening, months after it all ended, I got a letter from the city again. But this time, it wasn't a complaint. It was an invitation. They were giving out a quirky little Civic Creativity Award for residents who find legal, clever, and constructive solutions to neighborhood disputes. I framed it next to the certificate from the HOA. A matched set. Proof that even a quiet guy with a wrench and a grudge can win, without ever breaking the rules. So, if you're wondering whether it was worth it, all the hassle, all the pettiness, the inspections, the paperwork, the concrete and sweat, the answer is yes. Absolutely. Because some people build fences to keep others out. But I built a garage to shut one person in. And next time someone decides to park themselves in my way, I won't get mad. I'll get blueprints.